proclamation which you have just heard read by the Governor-General's official secretary was countersigned Malcolm Fraser. Go down in Australian history from Remembrance Day 1975 as Kerr's Kerr.
Hello and welcome to Issues 85, which tonight comes from Canberra. There can't be many of us need reminding that today is the 10th anniversary of the dismissal, an unprecedented moment in Australia's history. And our guest tonight is the Prime Minister who was dismissed, Gough Whitlam. Mr Whitlam, thank you for joining us.
Pleasure to be here.
And also, we have a panel of questioners, and to ask the questions tonight, our panel consists of political writer Mungo MacCallum.
Good evening.
Michelle Grattan of The Age.
Good evening.
And from Monash University, Max Teichmann.
Good evening.
Thank you, panel, for joining us too. Mr Whitlam, it's a very important anniversary. Do you have a lump in the throat on the 10th anniversary?
Oh no, I'm in very clear voice.
Perhaps a metaphorical lump in the throat.
Oh, perhaps, but it's very much diminished by the immense support one finds all round the country.
I'd like, panel, for us to talk first of all, or for you to concentrate first of all, on the 3 years that Mr Whitlam was the Prime Minister. Mungo, let's go with you first.
Well, Mr Whitlam, after the dismissal, Malcolm Fraser's slogan for the forthcoming election campaign was the 3 dark years, let's turn on the lights. Now, to all of us who are there, that obviously represents a massive rewriting of history, but unquestionably there was a time when the Whitlam government began to go bad in electoral terms, at least. Can you pinpoint that time?
No, I can't, but we're looking back, 10 years or more now, and of course the 3 years of my government, even if you depict them as dark, cannot be thought by any standard to be as dark as the 7¼ years which followed them under Fraser.
Michelle, what about you?
One of the central problems during those years, Mr Whitlam, appeared to be your inability to get a good relationship with the trade union movement, at least a relationship which would deliver good economic results, and that's perhaps one of the contrasts between your government and this government. What were the difficulties there, and how much blame would you put on Mr Hawke as then President of the ACTU?
Well, Mr Hawke and the people who are his ministers all learned from the experience then that the trade union movement ought to give positive support to the Labor Party, particularly when it is in government. Now, Mr Hawke of today is not the Mr Hawke of 13 or to 10 years ago. And whatever may have been the situation then in his attitude or my minister's attitude has been very much changed by the experience, industrial and political, since then.
Would it be fair to say that perhaps your government was more preoccupied with the grand vision of changing Australian society and it didn't pay enough attention to those sort of bread and butter issues?
I don't think that is the case at all. We were confronted with quite unexpectedly, unpredictably, with economic circumstances of a severity which neither Australia nor any other Western country, developed country, had encountered since the late 1920s.
You're talking about the oil price rise.
Exactly. A circumstance which nobody had anticipated. And when I say nobody, I don't just mean members of the Labor Party or members of the Labor government or members of the Labor caucus. You can't quote anyone in the media, in the trade unions, among manufacturers, among bankers, among economists, the universities and so on, who predicted those circumstances. No one. Now, certainly we floundered on certain of these things. We didn't flounder as much as most comparable countries. And furthermore, it's all right saying in hindsight that we fell down on some things, but I go further. You can't quote any Treasury official, any banker, any manufacturer, any trade union leader, any economist who was any the wiser. That is, what we did has been very well publicised, it's all on the record, and you can't show that anybody else had any idea of doing it better than we did.
Well,
Max Teichmann.
Could I change the question slightly?
Yeah.
A lot of people thought that if you'd won in '69, not only would you have not had those problems that came up, but things would have been easier generally.
Oh, you're absolutely true, Mac.
And yet, in your book, you say apropos foreign policy and all that.
Yeah.
If you'd won in '69, it would have been a much harder and dirtier
That is probably so. But economically, the matters which I suppose that Mungo and Margaret were mentioning, there's no doubt things would have been easier, because we did, in fact, end in 1973, before the quadrupling of the oil price, those major economic rorts and distortions which our predecessors had continued for 23 years, and which, of course, had been exacerbated by Mr McMahon's budget, Snedden's budget, McMahon's government's budget in 1972.
And
now,
also, apropos this,
I'd go further. We should have won the '69 elections on the votes, but the electoral system had been distorted. If we'd had a fair electoral system, such as we now have in the federal parliament, or in New South Wales, or South Australian, or Victorian parliaments, we would have won government in '69.
On a practical
and you think
level,
it would have been a lot easier?
It undoubtedly would have been much easier.
And could I just make another comparison? This business, you weren't sufficiently concerned with bread and butter issues. Well, in '72, bread and butter, there was a lot of bread and butter. I mean, there had been a long boom, and I do think it seemed
the butter was very unevenly spread, and by the time people didn't get any butter at all.
But at any rate, the idea of the priority of social reforms as against economic fixing seemed normal. Whereas, of course, when Mr Hawke comes in after Mr Fraser, bread and butter issues obviously are the centre of concern.
See,
so I think the comparisons are invalid.
Many of these things were very much bread and butter issues. That is, I suppose I made them bread and butter issues. Access to good opportunities in education, good health services, the arts and civic amenities. All those things were brought in by us, and because we showed them to be bread and butter issues capable of fulfilment.
And yet the gloss somehow wore off your government in a quite spectacular fashion, and through '72 in the lead up to the election, everyone was enthusiastic, everyone was happy at the idea of change. The slogan, "It's time," was quite obviously the right one.
Well, let's go
through most of '73. The same thing applied right up to the tariff cut. But then in '74,
the tariff cut,
something went wrong.
People are now coming to see that the tariff cut was the wisest thing we've done, Australia has done, any Australian government has done, in nearly 50 years on the question of protection. And nobody's restored the cut. Nobody.
It's easy to
it's very easy to restore it, isn't it?
It's also easy to have hindsight, isn't it, I think, for people generally to say, well, we did... But it seems to me, and a lot of people say, that perhaps you moved too fast, do you think, with reform?
No, that impression is sometimes given because we had to do things several times in order to get them through. That is, we had to put things through the House of Representatives twice and have them defeated twice in the Senate before we could have them put to the people in the double dissolution election, April, May '74. We then had to put them again through a joint sitting, well, both houses, and then a joint sitting in July '74. That is, we had to do these things several times to get them done at all. But when you say we did too much too soon, so to go back to the things that Max rose there, is anybody going to suggest now that independence for New Guinea came too soon, that voting against South Africa came too soon, that normalising relations with China came too soon? all of them should have been done years before.
But they did come in a rush.
Yeah,
and isn't this the impression that people have, that all these things came in a rush? And isn't it, maybe they were, but isn't the impression...
Although you said you were going to stay in for 10 years, inside you thought you'd have to go like a rat up a drain pipe because you expected to be clobbered by the kind of establishment that you referred to as being...
I didn't think...
I had a feeling that you thought we only have a short time and we'd better make the
Well, I can understand that, but that really comes that the pace of Parliament and everything that we proposed was in parliamentary terms, and that's why it was so essential for our opponents, and particularly after they corrupted Kerr and suborned Barwick, to undo the parliamentary, to close off the parliamentary avenue. But we certainly were an active government.
Mr Whitlam, I'd like to move on now to comparisons with today's government, because Michelle Grattan, I know that you feel that useful discussion can take place if we link the Whitlam government with the Hawke Labor government, isn't that right?
Well, I wonder if we could start by asking you, Mr Whitlam, whether you're rather saddened that the spirit of reform, which you've kept alive, as we see from your testimony, as you call it, seems to have died in Australia, at least to a considerable extent. People...
I mean, it's certainly not been dead. You go around anywhere in Australia with me this week and you'll see it's not dead.
But the drive has gone out of it.
It's vigorous
Why
as it
is
was.
that, do you think? Is it because these are harder times?
I think
people
these
have got
days
other priorities?
there are many people in the Labor Party who are so frightened of putting a foot wrong that they won't put a foot forward.
Because they're
Including
scared of
government?
losing government, do you
But
think?
isn't that this whole thing of the impressions that I was suggesting before, that the impression was given by your government, that rightly or wrongly, that one of the reasons that you lost it was that you moved too fast, that people now perhaps have overreacted and they've become ultra-cautious?
Yes.
But isn't there more to it? Isn't it really a rather different age that you were looking for collective solutions to problems and you struck a responsive chord?
Yes.
Now, take the tax debate, for example. People are debating politics
Now,
very
I'm not going to
individualistically,
debate tax. I'm
rather
not going
selfishly.
to criticise the present government.
But I'm talking about the general political atmosphere, not specific measures. Do you think there's a different atmosphere now, a decade later?
In some respects, yes. But...
And why?
Well, I've already stated, haven't I? I mean, you remember I said that there are some people who are so frightened to put a foot wrong that they won't put a foot forward.
But that's in the Labor Party. Isn't this atmosphere more generally in the community?
Oh, well, it's up to the Labor Party to change that attitude, isn't it? The Labor Party is a party of reform, or it is nothing. I mean, if the Labor Party were to reflect the Liberals, and I'm not suggesting for 1 minute the Hawke government does reflect the Liberals, for God's sake, I'm not going to be manoeuvred into saying that about Hawke or Rann or Kane or Bannon or Burke. They don't. They're immeasurably better than the Liberals. But if, insofar as we defer issues because we are frightened of the reaction against it by the Liberals and others, we are disappointing our supporters.
Yet in a recently published interview, one of your ministers, Jim McClelland, said A, that he considered this to be a very boring government, the Hawke government, and B, that he didn't really consider it to be a Labor government at all, and that it had abandoned that responsibility for reform.
Now, I know the old trick of quoting articles or interviews by colleagues or opponents. All I can say is, for reasons which ought to be well known, I have not been in Australia for more than, 2 days, and I haven't seen any Australian newspapers for 6 weeks. So I can't be expected to respond to an extract or a summary of something which I've had no opportunity of seeing. Now, each of you is quite proficient, and proficient or not, addicted to expressing your opinions, each of you. Now,
Max
if you hold an opinion which you want to stir me to refute or accept, put it in your own names, for God's sake. That is, none of you write articles by quoting from what other people have said. You put your own damned views.
Max Teichmann,
Now, you
please.
do it to me.
Well, could I? Can I talk about foreign policy for a few
You can
minutes?
talk about foreign policy.
Well,
I know that
I was interested in some of the things you said in your book, and I'm going to quote you. You don't mind me doing that, do you?
I mean, I hope everybody will read the whole of the book, not least the longest chapter, that on international
I really
affairs.
quote people, but I feel I should quote.
No, that's fine.
Well, I think it'd be useful to move on to foreign policy,
Well, you
and
did
Michelle
say,
and Mungo too.
yeah, one of the things you said that Labor was in the horns of a dilemma during the Vietnam War and during this whole period. That if you denounced or criticised American policies in Vietnam or just about anywhere else, this was construed as an attack on America.
That's right.
And then the alliance, and you're in danger of being regarded as anti-Australian.
That's right.
Now, do you think were you able to solve that problem in your time?
When I was leader, unquestionably we solved it.
Yeah, I got the impression that you were still targeted pretty successfully as a little bit anti-American.
Now, certainly that was said by our opponents, but I don't think it carried any weight at all. I think the public supported all that we did in that respect. I mean...
Well, I don't want to talk about the present government, but I will. There is an impression that they are very fearful of being too critical of the United States on the ground that you point out, namely this dilemma for Labor or radical hasn't gone away. Do you think this is perhaps
I'm living overseas now,
thing?
as you know, for over 2 years. I'm the government's representative at UNESCO, and the Americans have withdrawn from UNESCO and have done their best to undermine it. And I have been quite outspoken in exposing their methods and exposing their methods and opposing their objectives and their methods.
Mr. Whitlam, what do you think?
And so I can't talk on policy in general. For one thing, I have a government job and I must limit myself to the ambit of that job. But where, as in UNESCO, I believe that what the Americans are doing is wrong, and where I believe the way they're going about it is wrong, I say that to the Americans, I say it to the other members of UNESCO, and I say it not only in closed meetings, but in public meetings, such as the session of the General Conference of UNESCO, which I was attending from the beginning of October until last week.
Perhaps
Margaret,
it's worth
could I pick
recalling
up
that...
the final one and then I'll shut up?
Okay.
This is
on
foreign policy.
I want to stay with foreign policy for a while.
Because you did, you say in your book, and I think you're probably right, you were saying that when an alliance is having the effect of creating domestic political discord for any length of time in either of the countries, then that alliance is doomed.
Yes.
Now, what do you think of the present state of the
I think the Americans are far... Well, let me say, I'm not au fait with all these aspects, but obviously living in Europe as I am, I realise that the American heavy-handedness with New Zealand, their overreaction to New Zealand, is because they fear a development of New Zealand policies among the smaller nations of Western Europe. Now, I can speak from that, from a conversation and reading on the spot. And it's not only where the Americans do things excessively, it's where they fail to do things. And I think I have, over the years, taken enough interest in those small states of the South Pacific to say what our new ambassador has said in Washington itself, that by condoning French nuclear tests in the South Pacific and by allowing Americans and their stooges to exploit the tuna resources of the South Seas, the Americans are producing a quite unnecessary degree of disillusionment among those newly independent states. Now, I've said this in UNESCO, Dalrymple has said it in the United States, and he's right, and I'm right. That is where the Americans are wrong. The sensible thing that we should say in the interests of our own country, of our region, and of the world as a whole, is to say they're wrong.
And were your government able to do this?
Yes, I think we were.
Michelle Grattan, I want to hear
I mean, there's no question what we did when Nixon bombed Hanoi and mined Haiphong.
Indeed.
We went through a bad passage then, and then it was patched up.
Michelle, please.
Mr. Whitlam, perhaps we could...
That is, we understood American public opinion.
That's the end of that answer.
Better.
Michelle Grattan,
It's
please.
an end when I say so, if you don't mind. And I don't cross the world to be put in my place in that rough way. I mean, what will your audience think of the ABC? The ABC's in big enough trouble.
This is SBS.
Well, satellites are in big enough trouble without alienating distinguished supporters like myself.
You've been out of Australia for a long time, you obviously.
Unfortunately, we've only been allowed a certain
they
amount of
wouldn't
time.
tolerate this sort of thing on French television.
No.
A commaire behaving like that.
This commaire is going to say it's Michelle Grattan's
We
turn.
turn to another area of foreign policy, Mr. Whitlam, and that is the Indonesian relationship, which you always put a great deal of importance on.
Exactly.
That's now rather complicated by the Indonesian PNG border problem and the refugees and the pressure on Australia. Could I ask you how you see policy developing over the next few years in that area?
I see great hopes of a more sensible approach in that as a result of some very clear and until recently courageous statements by our two political leaders. By John Howard, just before he became leader of the Liberal Party, in an article in one of the Fairfax papers, I forget which one it was, and also by Bob Hawke in an interview with on Radio Australia. Now, each of them had good things, sensible things to say in our relationship with Indonesia. And some of the Australian media, the Australian government subsidised media, Radio Australia, have acted for several years like Radio Free Europe as against Indonesia. That is, they're spreading disinformation in Indonesia the same way as Radio Free Europe spreads it in Eastern
I think
Europe.
you might have lost touch with a lot of, with your own Labour movement. A lot of people wouldn't agree with that.
That is true. You don't agree with me either.
No.
But you're wrong on this. That is, I have taken a consistent
I know you have.
and a long-range interest in this thing, and it is quite absurd.
I couldn't work out why you did. I assumed it was because you think Indonesia's too strong, there's too many of them.
It's not only that at all. I look at who's behind the various movements, and when I see there's an absolute handful alone of people that stir up issues on Timor or on the OPM.
Like a security report.
There has been.
This is a little groups of malcontents and agitators working with evil all around the world. This used to be said of every revolutionary movement that's ever started.
Now, I've been in some of these places, and I see, as far as you can see, that the stuff that is said is quite inaccurate.
But Mr. Whitlam, will you acknowledge that during the period of your government, and indeed over the period of successive Australian governments, there has been an uneasy feeling that perhaps we are being too appeasing towards the Indonesians, that whenever the Indonesians make any move at all, whether it's a territorial move or a political move, we tend to bend over backwards to accommodate
I
them.
don't think we take that at all. You're asking me what I thought is the present situation, and I said I took great heart from the fact that at last, the first time for very many years, you find the leader of the opposition, as he now is, and the leader of the government, both saying sensible things on this issue. And I can't think for several years before that either of them or their predecessors had said sensible, responsible issues.
Do you think that's very significant?
Yes, I do.
I would have thought
I
the
believe
significant thing
that
was
the
whether our
public,
policies were correct or not.
I believe that the public will respond to some sensible statements by their political leaders. And I think it's quite farcical for people to slobber over some people who are expatriates, paid for and given diplomatic status by some very small countries in Africa.
Should we not be slobbering over the Timorese?
I think what we ought to do is what governments in fact have done, though they've said very little, that is to improve their conditions. I don't for 1 minute think that that border, which the Dutch and the Portuguese laid down in Timor a few centuries ago meets the wishes or the aspirations of the present generation of Timorese in any respect whatever.
Well,
that is, the local language is spoken on each side of that border.
I wouldn't know what the Timorese wanted for themselves. I know that it's been made pretty difficult for them to say.
It is easier for them to say things now than it has been. Now, don't get bogged down on one issue. The fact is that there's immense publicity given to any dissidents from Fretlin or from OPM, that is, from people who lost out and now want Australian governments or some of their supporters to try to put them back. That is, it's the Fretlin's own fault.
Isn't the bottom line that your government took the view that Australians would obviously not go to war over the Indonesian invasion of Timor, that Australians would be very unlikely to go to war over any possible Indonesian invasion of Papua New Guinea?
It goes back further than that. It goes back further than that. We are very smug in Australia. We can afford to be very smug in Australia. We have a continent which has no international boundaries. We are surrounded by countries which have been saddled with inherited colonial boundaries in which they had no say themselves whatever. And it is the height of irresponsibility for academics to talk and for politicians to remain silent on these issues while some outsiders stir them up, and while Radio Australia does the same. Radio Australia, I repeat, has pursued in matters concerning Indonesia the same attitude that Radio Free Europe pursues as regards Eastern Europe.
I remember reading...
Max, I don't want you to go any further with that because we're going to run out of time.
I'm getting nearly as annoyed as you are.
Well, you maintain that rage just for a moment. Could I move on now, please, sir?
The fact is that my attitude on Indonesia
it's very difficult to make this man be quiet.
Margaret, you mustn't interrupt like this.
No.
You can't bring people like us together and expect it to be like a kindergarten.
We haven't met for years.
I wish the boss would have given me an unlimited amount of time.
Look, let's face the situation that relations with Indonesia deteriorated.
Yeah, I will.
Relations with Indonesia deteriorated because Indonesia, except West New Guinea, got its independence in the very month that the Chifley government was defeated, Bala Menzies government, and Evatt was succeeded as Foreign Minister by Spender. And Spender was an evil man in this respect. And until the 60s, we were backing a completely fruitless course in regard to Indonesia. And when the Dutch decide to get out of Indonesia, when the British decide to get out of Kalimantan, Borneo, when the Portuguese decide to get out of Timor, we in Australia blame Indonesia. That is, Indonesia has been afflicted, and those islands, that archipelago, has been afflicted with borders fixed on it from the other side of the world, and we in Australia, having a whole continent with no international troubles within our borders at all, we presume to lecture them about what they should do. They've had to deal with the problem. At least you can't blame Indonesia for what happened in Vanuatu.
Thanks, Mr. Whitlam. Could we please, panel, move on to the dismissal, which we've been treated to in enormous quantities in the last few days and weeks leading up to this 10th anniversary. Mr. Whitlam, could I ask you first, right through the so-called loans affair, did you ever feel that you were experiencing a destabilising process from outside somewhere, like from another political party or from the establishment or from somewhere else?
Oh, well, the whole discussions on borrowing petrodollars to conserve or develop our own energy resources, the whole of that was abandoned early in May 1975. Later on, there were obviously efforts and successful efforts to destabilise us and discredit us. But they were afterwards. Well, by the media, I suppose, particularly, you can say Khemlani. See, Khemlani hadn't got a cent from us and wouldn't get a cent from us. and hadn't been able to introduce anybody with whom we could negotiate, because we weren't negotiating with Kenlani, but he wasn't able to introduce anybody with whom we could negotiate, and he'd spent a great amount of money, presumably with this prospect in mind, and he was out of pocket and hadn't got a cent from us and wouldn't get a cent from us. So he then, of course, sells out the Liberals and sells out the Melbourne Herald, I think it was, or it might have been the Age, I forget what, one Melbourne papers. And of course, I think there were very few of us, two of my ministers alone, who met Kamlani. But of course he saw very much more of Phil Lynch and Phil Lynch's staff and the staff on the Age. I wouldn't suggest that you had a bar of him, Michelle, than he ever did of me or any of my associates.
If you had met him, do you think you would have been able to short-circuit the thing early, if you had met Kamlani in those early stages and been able to form a personal judgment on it?
I wasn't particularly... I thought that this, like all other financial matters, should be dealt with by the officials who had responsibility. And as you damn well know, the crux of the trouble was that there was rivalry between Treasury, an old established department, and Minerals and Energy, a new powerful department, from the top down.
So isn't that
That is, they both of them were headed by former Treasury officials.
So shouldn't you have done something about that early in your time?
I did. I ended it, didn't I, early in May.
But shouldn't you have ended it earlier by making sure that the departments weren't headed by arch rivals, both of whom had reputations as arch conservatives?
Well, I'm not going to say that they're necessarily arch conservatives. They were great empire builders. And one of them, the head of the Treasury, had been away from the Treasury for at least 10 years as Treasurer of the ILO in Geneva. And the other, who was thought by previous secretaries of the Treasury to be the best successor, had in fact been sidetracked into other departments. Now, there was this rivalry at the top. And my government, in fact, did, right at the beginning of 75, you remember, bring together that Expenditures Review Committee, where the heads of the crucial spending and monitoring departments, including the two we've mentioned, met together with their ministers, and they had the brawl in the open. And so it was then that, after seeing what was going on then, exposing their antipathy, their rivalry, I said early in May 1975, well, let's put an end to this. And that's when it stopped. And of course the Melbourne papers, I forget was the Age or the Herald, it might have been both. The Age, was it? I mean, I said a couple of days ago that it was the Age, and so I think it was yesterday, and somebody corrected me and said it was the Herald.
Oh, they had a slice of it too.
Yeah. Well, at any rate, they were buying documents and so on for a man who was wanting to recoup his losses, and so did Phil Lynch, God rest his soul. He and his staff, some of whom have been resurrected, I notice, on this crucial anniversry.
Margaret,
they were dealing with him.
Could I whip in a quick might have been on this?
Yeah.
Now, if this whole idea of buying back the farm,
yes,
which after all Grattan and McEwen had talked about,
indeed they did.
If you had have got that off the ground, do you think the present economic structure of Australia would be very different, or don't you think, in retrospect, it made much difference? I'm thinking, for example, of our massive balance of payments deficits, our overseas debt. Now, do you think that thing would have made a big difference had it been allowed to run?
It is a very disturbing feature of the Australian economy that we owe so much overseas. But while the Fraser government entered into overseas debts, governmental debts, and encouraged the states to enter into overseas governmental debts to an extent much greater than we'd ever contemplated, yet the greatest part of our overseas debt, in fact, has not been incurred by governments, but by overseas companies or their associates or satellites within Australia. But what we had done before all this petrodollars became available, what we were aiming to do was to give people who took out life assurance policies and to give the life assurance societies the same security and incentive to invest in development projects as we gave them for investing in government bonds and in housing loans. And that legislation was defeated in the Senate. But look, we were at a period when all these petrodollars were available, and in a period before the Arab states had made a deal with the American banking houses to channel their petrodollars through them.
It would have been lovely if any of them had actually appeared.
Panel,
Yes, of course it would. And incidentally, the premiers all saw how beneficial this would be to them, because there was something in it for all of them to develop their energy resources and their energy delivery systems.
I'd like you now to consider the Constitution, because of course the Constitution is intimately involved with a lot of what we've talked about. Michelle Grattan, have you got questions in that area too?
Well, it seems, Mr Whitlam, that despite all that happened in 75 and despite efforts by both sides of politics from one time and another, we're still as far from really fundamental constitutional reform as ever. Now, you say this is still necessary in these vital areas like the Senate's power. Lionel Bowen suggested a special commission with you and Malcolm Fraser. But isn't this cause really hopeless now in Australia? And why do you think it's not?
Well, let me, after all, the Constitution, my own view is that you should have a referendum where it is clear that only a referendum
We're talking about
can...
those areas.
Pardon?
We're talking about those areas, those really
exactly.
crunchy areas.
I'm only advocating now. I don't advocate the holding of referendums on those subjects where the federal parliament can carry out necessary national policies without changing the Constitution, as, for instance, by adopting, ratifying international conventions, as my government did in respect of two which have been upheld for this purpose by the High Court. Nor am I, and of course I pay tribute to the High Court for having been quite creative in enabling the federal parliament to act as a modern legislature, whatever the founding fathers might have intended.
It's understandable that after such a very busy day you're losing your voice.
No, but well, that's it. But, and this is not the end of the day.
I know it's not.
Your listeners and viewers are pretty lucky, but there's also some live audiences which will have the benefit of my views later on today. But there are some issues where only a constitutional alteration will be efficacious.
But how
and
can
they
you possibly
involve
be optimistic?
Well, listen. One such case was the situation which arose where, during 1975, two of the states distorted the political complexion of the Senate elected in May 1974. This could not be cured by a convention. There had been a convention which avoided any trouble from this for nearly a quarter of a century. And a Liberal Premier of New South Wales and a Country Party Premier of Queensland overruled, disregarded a convention which had been followed by every Labor, Country Party and Liberal Premier throughout the 50s, 60s and into the 70s, and initiated by Menzies. They overruled it. So then, to cure it, you had to alter the Constitution. The people were given the opportunity to alter the Constitution in the only way they ever have of doing it. That is, the federal parliament held a referendum. And the people overwhelmingly ensured that from then on, whenever there was a vacancy in the Senate, the state government and parliament had to fill the vacancy with a new senator who belonged to the same party as the former senator belonged to at the time of his or her election. There's another thing that has to be done.
In a decade.
No, it's not a small. Well, it's a scant. It's one. But that shows how it can be done. It was done in less than 2 years. And don't forget, that was the core of what happened in October, November 1975. You can say that Kerr was corrupt, as he was. You can say that Barwick acted improperly, as he did. you can say that Fraser bullied and corrupted Kerr, as he did. But none of them could have done any of those things but for the fact that the Senate's political complexion had been changed.
But you can also
and
say...
that can't now be done again.
You can
now,
also say the
thing.
Senate had too much power, and it still got that power.
It does. But the time that it abused its power, the only time, really, that it has abused its power since the Depression, was because it abused the Constitution in a way which has now been cured.
But it's the only aspect that has been cured. The Senate can still block supply, the Senate isn't elected simultaneously
I mean, you can
with the
speculate
House
whether the Senate will do it, because this is a continuing problem insofar as no government in my lifetime, and I don't think even in yours, will have a majority in the Senate. You can say that it's unlikely that a Senate would do it again, and you might say that it's unlikely that any Governor-General would do it again. And you can also be certain that if the circumstance was arising, any Prime Minister would meet the Governor-General on neutral territory, wouldn't go out and meet him in his parlour. Now, but there's another amendment which needs to be done, and that is, although we have a system of 3 elections every 3 years for the federal parliament, that's what the Constitution clearly intended, and the US has a system by which there is an election for the federal parliament, all the state legislatures, every 2 years, yet we have elections in Australia more frequently than they have in the US. And this means that we ought to put once again that proposal, which has been put twice and which Kerr could have put. That is, that whenever there is an election for the House of Representatives, the longer-term senators should also come up from re-election. That is, this would concentrate the mind of senators wonderfully.
It's been put twice and it's been lost twice.
But the majority of people voted in favour of it. The majority of the electors voted in favour of it. You need to have a majority of the electors also voting for it in a majority of states.
I mean, the Swiss have only recently given votes to their women, and I mean,
well, there are
God knows
some
how
Swiss
many
cantons where women don't have votes.
Yes, I mean, and they've had to try again until they've got it.
And what you've got to do is to have a regular method of acquainting the public with what is wrong and how you can put it right. And that means that everybody, from the Prime Minister down, has to discuss this matter publicly and not just leave it to election campaigns.
We're rapidly getting towards the end of the program.
I think we have.
Is your time up?
Yes.
I'd like to know, if Sir John Kerr walked in now, how would you feel? Would you greet him?
Like all this distinguished and decent panel, we would ignore him. You wouldn't find a person of any decency or honour in this country being seen on any panel with Kerr. And why do you think he's out of the country now? People don't ordinarily visit Paris in November.
Could you tell me your attitude to Malcolm Fraser's appointment to this commission for South Africa?
Well, I've been asked this on very many forums, and I suppose I can, in the last 2 days, and I can only repeat. I suppose we must go on. You have a somewhat arrogant assumption that people interested in public affairs watch you only. Now, it's very interesting and pleasant to watch you, I've no doubt. But I suppose I have to repeat it. The fact is that whatever Fraser's attitude was to South Africa and apartheid in the past, by 1979 he was convinced that it was disastrous, and he has consistently, and considering the composition of his caucus, courageously condemned apartheid. And I completely support the Prime Minister's invitation to him to represent the Australian point of view on this panel to see the South African regime. And it has this great advantage also. You must remember that the Thatcher government is trading for all it's worth, investing for all it's worth, as far as it can still get investors to invest, in South Africa, despite the situation there. Now, Australia's influence in Britain and even on the Thatcher government will be stronger because the attitude is not just being put by a Labor appointee in the normal sense, but by a former Conservative Prime Minister.
Margaret, could I introduce a final jarring
Yes, please.
note?
It has to be final.
Do you have any regrets about trying to get the PLO office established here, or the Arab League office established here?
No, I
you don't
believe...
have any... You thought that judgment was correct?
I believe...
And you think their track record's been quite acceptable since?
I certainly deplore some of the things which are done and attributed to the PLO. I'm not certain that they all are in fact done by the PLO. But what I say is this: you cannot discuss Middle East issues without discussing things with the PLO.
You have to have an office here to do it?
I think it was an information office that it had here.
Yes.
I mean, I don't support all the propaganda that comes out of all the embassies in Canberra, or out of all the agencies or information offices that come here. But I do say this: something has to be done about the position of the Arabs in the occupied territories.
Oh, that's a different question.
And if you're to do anything about that, you've got to talk to the PLO, and also you've got to bring the Russians into the discussion as well. Now, I'm not saying that the PLO and the Russians haven't been quite obstructive and provocative in this area, but also one has to recognise that the Israeli governments, even including the present one, which is much better than the one that we had a couple of years ago, has also been provocative about this. The future of Israel, the future of the Palestinians, lies in talking between all the people that have some representative responsibilities in that area. And the PLO does have some representative responsibilities in that area.
Can I have time for one of my sessions?
Just a quick one.
Margaret, why don't you control them? You silence me or try to, and then you go and let them have last goes.
Quick one, come on.
Okay, very quick one. Given that a number of the policies, a number of the aims, and certainly a lot of the vision you tried to provide to Australian politics has now been somewhat dismantled, somewhat toned down.
I don't say it's been dismantled, it's been toned down, yes.
It's been toned down.
It will revive with this book.
Was the enthusiasm a waste of time?
Certainly not. I mean, the present government will be much more popular insofar as it diligently pursues the remaining agenda.
Michelle, just a quick one.
Whitlam, I notice you're wearing a badge for the re-election of the Hawke government for the third term. You're sponsor of that campaign. If someone said to you, Gough, what do you want to get from a third term Hawke government in return for your donation, what would you say?
I'd want a more enthusiastic and inspiring government.
Final question from me. How does the future look for Australia for you, Mr. Whitlam, and do you miss living here?
Yes, I do. I will be wanting to, and Margaret, my consort, will be wanting to live back here in Australia at the end of the 3 years for which we went to Paris.
So we can expect to spar with you on another panel before too long, then?
Well, I'm prepared to give you one more go.
Thanks for this go, and I hope that your stay in Australia on this occasion is a happy one. Thanks for joining us.
Has been so far.
Thank you, Max and Michelle and Mungo. Issues tonight came to you from Canberra, a special edition on Remembrance Day 1985. I'll be back next week with another edition of Issues when we'll be considering the future of the Conservative parties in Australia, and notably the Liberal leadership. That's Issues next Monday night. So until then, good night.